Thanks to Dr. Simi Malhotra for enlightening us with the Globalectic vision as the method of approaching world literature. I think that was really interesting to know. Thank you so much for your mesmerizing and scholarly talk. At this point, I'd like to move on to our discussion session. So I would like to invite Mashrur Shahid Hossain for initiating the discussion in today's session. Meanwhile, I would also like to request our audience to write down your questions in the chat box. Mashrur Shahid Hossain, sir, over to you.
Thank you. And of course, thanks to Professor Simi. It was a fascinating talk, and it's also nice to hear you. Yeah, Globalectics is a increasingly popular thing, and not unlike India, it is not much read and discussed in Bangladesh as well. But we teach, at our university, in our Department of English, Jahangirnagar University, we teach Globalectics. I should say I teach Globalectics in my course on comparative literature. And since Ngugi as a writer is my personal favorite, so there might be a kind of biased attitude to it. But of course, the reason that Globalectics is significant is because of the very name and because of two things that, thanks to Simi, that she particularly concentrated on, that is the conception of poor theory and cyberality, which is a kind of my personal interest because of my present work on electronic literature. So Simi Malhotra somehow tried to cover almost all the major elements, all the chapters of Globalectics, the book. And it's a kind of about the theory and the practice of knowledge. So there's a kind of attempt at combining or negotiating the pragmatic and the theoretical, so that the common criticism raised against post-colonialism, that it's more an armchair critic-like position, less activism. So somehow Globalectics is an attempt to minimize that criticism. So three things that Professor Malhotra concentrated on are poor theory, cyberality, and Globalectics. So let me address this one by one, and that is what we learned, and also what we may add to it. So poor theory is really an exciting thing, because the challenge that poverty poses is to survive. So when we meet such challenge, we strive to survive. So for survival, we innovate things. So a poor innovates not out of luxury, and a poor innovates not with many resources at hand. A poor innovates out of necessity. A poor innovates with whatever scanty resources they have. Thus, what the poor creates, innovates or reforms, it tells us not only the power of humans, that is the unimaginable range of things that human can make, but it also tells us a different story of reality that was otherwise silenced or ignored. So therefore, we may consider Globalectics as a part of poor theory, that is a theory of the poor, or a theory of the people or entity on the edge, on the margin, that share space with the centers and gradually become one of the centers. So therefore, Globalectics is on that hand highly political in that sense. Second important point that I'm personally more interested in, that is cyberality. And of course, Simi Malhotra covered the basic things about what Ngugi said, and that is exciting. Because one thing that Ngugi mentioned in Globalectics and many other later of before interviews and talks, that is, orality is back in a different way. And the way orality was kind of stigmatized, and the reason that oral literature that came into being is to manage that stigma related to orality, that it's a kind of hierarchically less quality thing. So therefore, cybernetics brought back that orature, that orality. And this time it is smarter than printing. My personal interest also lies in a fact that I've been working on, that is how features of orature are also present in our cyber writings. I should not say cyber writings, cyber activities. So if we think of 7 features of orature, that is, it is aggregative, it is additive, it is abundant, it is telluric or close to the soil, it is agonistic, it is interlocutory, and it is performative. Now, if these are the 7 features of orature, then we find that all these things are present and accentuated in cyber activities. For example, if you think of interlocutory aspect in orature, for example, when we do the Kobe gun, there is also kind of sawal jawab. And this sawal jawab interaction is evident in cybernetics, and also performative things are available from emoji to the use of sound. So therefore, Ngugi found it rather a kind of, found in spite of several problems with cybernetics, he found it rather an emancipatory means because its potential for being accessed by almost anyone. And because of cybernetics democratic openness, cyber communication may lead to or has led to cyberality, or we can say cyber orality. So it has been becoming an important trend in contemporary and future world literature. It's a literature that has the ability to cross national borders. You don't need passport, you need password. So ability to cross national borders, you don't need visa, you need ability to perform online so that you can transcend insularities and make space for participatory conversations. And of course, all these are grounded on the major point that today's talk, Simi's talk was on, that is globalectics. Of course, I say that I love the term because of its combination of global and dialectics. So the very term suggests a kind of space in which conversation can happen. It is important that Ngugi was thinking of a kind of congress of national literature so that it is possible to transcend nationalistic insularities. So for Ngugi, literature has universal values. But of course, this notion of universality is different from the Eurocentric or previous Eurocentric notion of universality. When asked by an interviewer that whether his books suffer from less leadership because his books are about a place or a time that most people don't know about, Ngugi stated famously that, quote, universality is the child of particularity, unquote. So he reminds us of that famous grain of sand. So it is a grain of sand. It is limited, it is localized, yet it contains the world. Something that we find in our Bangla phrase, Gokure Bindiche Akash. So Ngugi advises that a writer has to be faithful to that grain, which might be local, in order to envision the universe. Now, if literature has universal values, and if it has extraterritorial reach in the context of world literature, a meeting of world literatures, that is a meeting of the national literatures of the world, would lead to a better understanding of humanity. And more interesting thing is Ngugi's concept of multi-log, that is multi-language, other stuff. But multi-log is not only about multi-language, it's also about multiple forms of art. So he is thinking through globalectics, not a meeting of world literatures, but also a universal congress of arts. That is a universal meeting of oral, written, and cyber literatures, a meeting of a congress of literature and other forms of art. And all these things, all this meeting suggests a kind of interaction, and they may lead to a better, more nuanced understanding of humanity that may lead to a sense of tolerance and understanding, something that both world literature and comparative literature intends to achieve. So I would like to close the discussion, also initiate some questions by referring by contextualizing globalectics. If you think of globalectic reading as reading a text with the eyes of the world, and on the other hand, seeing the world with the eyes of the text, then we may rethink our practice of English literature in Bangladesh, maybe in South Asia, and also our practice of studying African literature in Bangladesh. It is important to note that in South Asia, but in Bangladesh as well, when we study or when we claim to study African literature, we are unabashedly and uncritically monolingual, that is English-centric. That is, we read, study, make presentation, do research, publish books on African literatures, on African writers, and now on Nigerian novels, now on South African novels, now Achebe, now Adiche. but well, these writings are in English. That is, these are Anglophone African literatures, while Africa boasts of many languages. So what we glibly ignore is that there are African writings in several other European languages, colonial languages, say French. So apart from maybe some writers like Leopold Sédar Senghor or maybe Ousmane Sembène, we have little exposure to African Francophone writings, let alone in French, even in translation. So this is an issue that is English monolingualism, even in post-colonial studies, that is addressed by decoloniality, a different kind of post-colonial approach. So reading globalectically, therefore, I suggest involves delinking. That is, it involves addressing the issues of domination and our indifference to such hegemonic domination. That is, breaking off from the coloniality of knowledge while we are claiming to be post-colonial. Not only French, in our monolingual focus on African writings in English, we also glibly ignore that there are African writings in Arabic language coming from Morocco, Egypt, Algeria. And I think we also forget that Algeria, Egyptian civilization, Algerian writings, well, these are from Africa. And so when we talk about Algeria, we are focusing more on Arabs than Africa, chiefly probably because these people are not as black as Nigerians. So consequently or concurrently, when we read the killing, when we read Albert Camus' The Stranger, so when we read the killing of an unnamed Arab in Albert Camus' The Stranger, rarely do we know that it's an Arab, arguably an Algerian, a Muslim African, who the French-speaking protagonist Massa kills. So it is legitimate that we concentrate on the protagonist's working of mind, his becoming a stranger. If it is legitimate, then it is also legitimate to inquire how the unnamed Arab guy walking freely in his country is made a stranger in a narrative told through a French guy bearing the legacy of French colonization in Algeria. So reading globalectically, that is seeing the world with the eyes of the text, involves being informed. That is, it involves exploring the issues of silencing, issues of selective perception in a text. It involves exploring the issues that the text may have raised, but we fail to note. Like in Globalectics, Ngugi noted a point like this, that S.T. Coleridge was against anti-slavery. So he said that we may reread the albatross in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner as, quote, the moral burden of slavery hanging on the psyche of the trading nations. And not only Arabic and French, we forgot that there are so many African languages. So when we talk about African literature, when we feel connected with African literatures, do we take into account the largest chunk of African literatures composed in African languages? Like Achebe in his famous essay talked about Shaban bin Robert, the national poet of Tanzania, who wrote in Swahili, a great poet in his own right. Shaban Robert is probably a great poet for us because we have not read him in Swahili and we have not read him in translation. Many times Ngugi did express his displeasure of the fact that African literature is known to the world through African literatures written in English, not even translation. And the famous prizes, most of the significant prizes given to those African writers who wrote in English. No way does that represent Africa proper. So reading globalectically, reading, say, African literature, globalectically involves destabilizing the center. It is not a fantastic vision of erasing the already established centers. It is generating, making space for several and many other centers so that there is conversation, so that there is no one center that can claim to be the only or the total or the final. Okay, this is a kind of my understanding and addition to what Simi Malhotra in her fascinating speech makes about. But of course, the final thing that Simi already mentioned is that there are two questions from my part. The one is that there is a common question that is world literature a conversation among the equals? Say, if giving prize is the culture of fame is common in this world, so how globalectics helps it. And second is, globalectics involves multi-log of art forms like theater, film, music, painting, etc. So there were questions about, after globalectics was published, the questions is that should literature, the term literature, be replaced by cultural studies, in which literature is one form, but other forms, that is theater, film, music, also exist. That is, it's a kind of inter-artistic, intercultural studies instead of world literature. That's all from my part. That's both a kind of question and also kind of comment.